All right, I'm looking at 1 minute past the hour. So let me again and officially welcome you to Independent Sector's September monthly policy update. I'm Ben Kershaw. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Government Relations here at IS. For those of you who are joining us for the first time on an IS webinar, welcome. We're a national organization representing a diverse set of nonprofits and foundations and corporate giving programs working to ensure that all people living in the United States thrive. If you're not a new attendee, welcome back. We missed you all in August. I hope you found some other way to fill your days since the July monthly policy update. I'll remind you, as part of our webinar feature, all lines are muted. We'll pause for questions. Please drop them in the Q&A box as you see fit throughout the program. You can email publicpolicy@independentsector.org with any technical issues. Before we start, I want to respectfully acknowledge I'm joining you from Washington, D.C., and it is the ancestral home of the Piscataway people who are still in the area working to reclaim their land and traditional practices. I also want to acknowledge that many of the buildings and places we inhabit in Washington were built by enslaved people. Wherever you are joining us from, we're glad to have you. I'm joined today by Wes Coulomb and Jessica Cameron, who are, as ever, our trusted partners at Washington Counsel Ernst & Young. And we also have a special cameo for you today from Emily Horowitz. Emily's a coalition partner of ours and a colleague at the American Heart Association, an IS member, and again, a trusted partner in so much of this work. Thanks for joining us, Emily. So it is Thursday afternoon. It's the last Thursday of the month, which means two things. It means that it's time for the IS monthly policy update, and it is time for the legislative boost that always accompanies the IS monthly policy update. There has been a CR in negotiations to keep the government open, and the last thing I want to do is steal Wes Coulomb's thunder. So Wes, what's the monthly policy update momentum doing on Capitol Hill?
Well, thanks, Ben. As you mentioned, the Senate realized we're having this meeting, and so they decided to go ahead and have a vote on the CR so they could leave town and pass it before they adjourn. So the Senate has now just started a vote on the passage of the CR that, if you've been following it, would extend the funding for the federal government through December 16th. The original version that Leader Schumer put out there with Senator Manchin's energy permitting legislation was dropped and modified due to opposition from some Democrats and Republicans. And now it's kind of it's more of a clean version of a CR. It has LIHEAP funds in there. It has some disaster relief funds in there. It also has some funds for Ukraine relief and war efforts, and then extends the federal government, all the agencies, through December 16th. And so that's voting right now in the Senate. It looks like it has the votes to pass. I think it will pass. And then it will be sent to the House later today, where they could conceivably pass it by late tonight or possibly by tomorrow midnight, which is obviously the deadline for the federal government to be funded. So I think they'll meet that deadline. It's going to get taken care of and done. And so once they pass that, it looks like the House will leave town and not come back until after the election. The Senate is scheduled to be out next week and scheduled also to come back for 2 weeks in October to deal with some legislative issues that they still have on their plate. There's some speculation they might not do that. I don't know if Jessica has any insights on that, but it seems to me that they might consider not coming back and just have the members stay in their states to campaign, given the midterms are fast approaching and this election is looking like it's going to be a very tight election in both the House and the Senate, and could determine who controls the House and the Senate when it comes out of this. I think the current momentum, the momentum has been with Republicans mostly in the House going into the last couple of weeks, but the Democrats have kind of taken some of that back. There still is the view from the pollsters that the Republicans will have a good chance of taking over the House in November at the elections. Not sure that the spread of the numbers on that. Obviously, it's been tightening, and it could even change between now and November 8th. The Senate is more of a toss-up. It's 50-50 right now. You have a handful of tight races that Republicans are defending some open seats. as well as some Democrat seats that are being challenged. And so right now the Senate is really more of a toss-up and how it shapes up as we get closer to November 8th. So I think people are now looking towards the election and see what happens with that. They still, like I said, still have the possibility the Senate might come back in October to process some things. I think one thing that the Senator's been looking at is some voting rights legislation. There was a deal in the Senate on a bipartisan basis with Senator Collins and others to deal with the Electoral College, Electoral Reform Act. That seems to be getting some momentum. I'm not sure if it's quite to the point where they're ready to pass it, move it on. The House has passed its own version of that, and so it looks like to me there's a chance that language or that issue gets resolved between now and the end of the year between the House and the Senate on something that not as sweeping as what we've seen in the past, but something more narrowly targeted towards what happened on January 6th and how to deal with the election of the president for the next go round in 2024. So obviously, if they pass their CR today and leave town this week, then we're kind of looking towards what happens in the lame duck session when they come back in December. They will come back in November for a couple of weeks, then break for Thanksgiving, and then kind of move towards trying to get things finished by the December 16th deadline at the end of the year. They still have a lot of things to deal with on their plate. They have obviously the appropriations process, since the CR only kicks the can to December. And so the thinking is, as they've done in the past, will they do an omnibus appropriations bill that encompasses all the appropriations bills into one large package at the end of the year? What else will that carry? You have some tax extenders, other health extenders that are expiring that people care about. They usually get wrapped up and taken care of as part of an omnibus appropriations bill and done at the end of the year. Some of those provisions are expired early this year, and some expire end of this year. So there's a lot for them to consider in the end of the year conversation. You have also the NDAA legislation. You have other bills that they're pushing for to get done by the end of the calendar year and out the door. And so it'll be a busy lame duck session. But at the same time, I also want to caution that the outcome of the election could also taint their mood to do a lot of things in December, depending on how the election shakes out. That will also determine what type of activity they'll do in December and how they want to process a big omnibus appropriations bill with other things tacked onto it, or if there'll be a mood to just kick the can again into the next year. There's several forces I think playing against CR, but there's also some forces playing in favor of CR, such as you have the appropriations chairs and ranking member, Senator Leahy and Senator Shelby, departing Congress end of this year, and so they are eager to get a bill done. You also have other members who are retiring that are pushing for things, and so we'll see how that plays out. You also have, I think, as Emily will mention in more detail, a pension bill. It's a bipartisan bill that's passed the House and also passed the Senate Finance Committee that's awaiting negotiations on a final package that I think is also very much in play to get done by the end of the calendar year. So that's also out there as well. So I'll kind of stop there, and anything that Jessica wants to add to my comments, and then also take some questions.
Sure, thanks, Wes. I would just maybe point out expanding on kind of two areas that Wes talked about. One is certainly for the midterm elections. We're definitely well into campaign season right now. And so after this CR hopefully moves forward for both the Senate and the House this week, most members will be back in their states and districts for the next few weeks campaigning to hold on to their seats. Like Wes mentioned, there's potential for some changes in the House and Senate next year. Currently in the House, Republicans need to just pick up 5 additional seats in order to win back the majority. So certainly just a handful of seats that they need to flip. I think earlier in the year, there were a lot of projections of this huge red wave coming in the House that Republicans would potentially pick up 20, maybe 30, or even more seats in the House next year based on Biden's approval and a lot of issues dealing with the economy as well. Currently, it looks like, however, that the if the House does flip, it would do so still on very narrow margins. It wouldn't be this huge kind of mandate that Republicans would get from flipping to minority to majority. But certainly that will mean a number of changes next year as far as having Republican control with still the White House and potentially the Senate still in Democratic control. I'll also say that for the Senate, it's split 50-50 down the middle right now. And with that, it looks like that could still be a toss-up. It could go either Republican or Democrat. I think the important thing to keep in mind there, however, is that in either case, it's pretty much not likely, or there's a very low chance that this will mean that there'll be a 60 vote threshold in either party. That means that in either case, there's going to be a narrow majority in the Senate, whether it's Democrats control with a majority or Republicans do. And so that will mean that in any case, there'll be divided government, and certainly that will have significant impact on what bills or what legislation can move forward. The second thing I'll just mention is that with regards to the end of the year package, that's certainly something that's important for the nonprofit sector, seeing as there are a number of provisions that could potentially get into a larger omnibus package. One that I know the sector is watching very closely is the universal charitable deduction. A bill originally with Walorski as one of the sponsors in the House that would expand and extend the provisions for UCD that were within the CARES Act. As mentioned previously, talked about, however, that really the big issue with this end of the year package is not so much the pieces within it, but whether there's a possibility for an end of the year package. Currently, as Wes mentioned, we'll have to see kind of how the midterm elections shape out, and whether there's an appetite for going forward with an end of the year package in December. So I'll stop there, but I think those are the two things to point out, and happy to answer any questions from Ben or anyone in the audience.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Wes. So yeah, please do put questions in the Q&A. Before we turn to Emily for that update you mentioned, Wes, I have one question for you all. As we're all watching the news with great concern about what's going on in Florida and other states, we're also, I think thinking that, as the charitable sector jumps in to help people in need in Florida, Congress is also going to be taking action on some sort of disaster relief legislation. And how does that prospect factor into improving odds of a year-end package or complicating a year-end package? Maybe even specifically with respect to that universal charitable deduction Jessica mentioned, which was originally created in a disaster relief bill of sorts, the CARES Act. How's that going to play out a little bit?
Yeah, good question, Ben. The current CR does have some disaster funding and some direction to FEMA to accelerate some of their funds in there, but for the situation that is unfortunately happening in Florida, there's just not enough time for them to assess how much they need. But you generally, in the disaster situation, they kind of look back and they go, after the fact, they go back and they provide funds for wildfires, hurricane relief, etc., to that state or that area. And they usually do a disaster zone. They've done both spending and to the states and through FEMA and otherwise. And also the SBA does disaster loans. They fund that quite a bit. Then you also have some, interestingly enough, they have like an employee retention tax credit, disaster tax credit that helps employers who retain their employees and keep their operations going even during a disaster such as a hurricane. And that's part of a tax package that they've done in the past. And so I think there will be some interest in doing that in the lame duck session. But to Jessica's point, the question is how much appetite will there be to do an omnibus appropriations bill? Even if they don't do a big package, maybe there's some appetite to do some more targeted items on the disaster front. I think there will be, given what's going on. We'll have to see how that plays out. So I think there's a good chance it'll be discussed and that they'll do something in the lame duck session on that issue. Just a question of what and to what extent. It's unclear.
Yeah, and I would just mention too, it's funny when obviously, really thinking of everyone that's been affected by hurricane season, that one of the downsides of fall, unfortunately. Certainly their members are keeping track of what's going on, but like Wes mentioned, you wouldn't necessarily see maybe a package happen within the next few weeks, but it would be something where it would be addressed potentially in a year-end package and then retroactive for kind of any losses or any kind of changes that are made. Congress is certainly, they're not strangers to this, like to hurricanes happening, to disaster relief. And it's something that certainly as they're moving forward, even if a year-end package doesn't get done, but an appropriations and an omnibus happens at the end of the year to continue funding the government, and that's something that will definitely be included.
I mean, Ben, they'll have to pass something by December 16th, right? Whether it's an omnibus appropriations bill with a lot of things tacked onto it, or it's something just more modest and short term, they'll have to pass something by December 16th in order to avoid another shutdown. So there will be another bill. The question is what does it contain, and how large is it, and what's the scope?
Got it. Thank you both. So I do want to turn to Emily Horowitz now for the update that we mentioned, and I know we have some of Emily's slides as well. So I will turn over to Emily and our man behind the curtain, Manuel.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks to Independent Sector for having me today, and Manuel for helping me out with the slides. I'm Emily Horowitz. I'm a Government Relations Manager for the American Heart Association, and I'm going to speak to you today a little bit about the Legacy IRA Act, which is a bill that would incentivize charitable giving from seniors. All right, I see the screen share is getting set up now. So today I am here, but I also have Sally Schaefer's name on this first slide. She's a consultant for the Heart Association. She is the principal of Uncorked Advocates and has been a great friend to, I think, many independent sector members. So if you have any questions, I have both my email and her email later on in the slides. Feel free to reach out to either one of us. The Legacy IRA Act builds upon the success of the existing IRA charitable rollover, which was established in 2006 and later made permanent in 2015. The rollover allows seniors to give up to $100,000 directly to charities from traditional IRAs each year. And this can be used to fulfill a required minimum distribution, so it doesn't get taxed as income. It rolls over directly to the charities. And I have on this slide comparing the current law to what we're proposing with the Legacy IRA Act, which takes the IRA charitable rollover a step further by allowing individuals to roll over a gift from their IRA to a split interest entity, such as a charitable remainder trust or a charitable gift annuity. These gifts can be up to $50,000, and they're limited to one time in the donor's lifetime. And additionally, it indexes for inflation the cap on the existing IRA charitable rollover, which hasn't been increased since 2006. The text of the Legacy IRA Act is included in two bipartisan bills that are expected to be fully paid for. The House's Securing a Strong Retirement Act of 2021, which passed by the House by a 414-5 vote, and the Senate's EARN Act, or Enhancing American Retirement Now Act, which had unanimous votes in both the Senate Finance Committee and the Senate Help Committee. The two overall packages, the House bill and the Senate bill, are not identical, but the Legacy IRA provisions within them are the same. Next slide, please. So why are we talking about expanding the IRA rollover? Why is this important? Well, we're seeing IRA rollover gifts grow rapidly due to a mix of tax changes, an aging donor base, increasing wealth, and also just seeing more charities focused on raising awareness of this type of giving option. So we really see this as an opportunity to solicit gifts from middle income seniors who have charitable intent and they have IRA assets, but need some retirement income. So having those split interest entities that can provide some income during the retirement for the life of the donor would be really wonderful, so they could see their charitable gift in their lifetime as opposed to waiting until the donor passes to make this gift. Next slide, please. And so this is the section I want to focus the most on, what's happening right now. I know we're in September, we're talking about the end of the fiscal year. Is this going to happen now? Well, passing a bipartisan retirement bill is a priority for both House Ways and Means Ranking Member Brady and Senator Portman, two champions who are retiring at the end of this year, and both see this as a legacy item. So we are feeling good about movement happening by the end of the calendar year. The House and Senate Big Eight have been starting informal talks to work through some of the differences between the two chambers' packages. Both sides have been repeatedly telling me that they anticipate quick agreement on the legacy IRA provision because it is the same in both bills. As part of the ongoing support for the Legacy IRA Act, we're circulating a sign-on letter supporting its inclusion in the final bipartisan package. I will share a link to that in a minute in the chat box, so you can review the letter and sign on if you're interested in doing so. The sign-on deadline for that is tomorrow at noon, but if you think you might need a little more time and can get your organization to sign on, just shoot me a note and we can talk about getting a couple more days to get your organization signed on. Next slide, please. This is just showing some of the groups that are part of the Legacy IRA Coalition. We have more than 55 national nonprofits, including many independent sector members. Next slide, please. And that is my presentation. I know I ran through a lot pretty quickly. Feel free to reach out to myself and Sally if you have any questions, if you're interested in learning more about the bill or joining the coalition. And I am also going to put in the chat the link that I share here to the American Heart Association's advocacy page for the Legacy IRA Act, which has some links to more materials and a description about what we've been working on as this coalition for the past few years. So thank you, everyone. I don't know if we have time for questions, but feel free to reach out by email if you would like to chat more about this or have any questions for me.
Thank you so much, Emily, for these 5 great minutes, but also for more so for the work you guys are doing. So while Emily puts those links in the chat, are there questions that people have about this effort? I mean, Emily, I was going to ask you how people can help, but I think that's really clear. So.
Yes, would love to have some sign-ons onto the letter. As of just a few minutes ago, we had, I think, 53 sign-ons, which is a great showing. Would love any more support, or if you're not quite ready to sign on to a letter but want to learn more and get engaged, would love to have you join our coalition.
And I'll just reiterate that for folks who may be new to this issue, which is, maybe slightly less simple to understand than most charitable tax policy. It's an issue that independent sector cares deeply about, has a long history on, and the IS policy team is certainly happy to engage with anyone on this as well, and working with hand in hand with Emily and Sally with the coalition.
Thanks, Ben. We really appreciate your support.
So absent any other questions for Emily, I want to again thank her and let her get back to bugging those Big Eight, so we can get this over the line in the end of the year bill. Further questions about the landscape of what you've heard from Washington Council before I make a few other notes on ongoing issues? Okay, I will keep an eye on the chat there. So I want to flag a few other issues that are certainly on our radar here at the end of September. The first to note is that last week, independent sector released fairly wide-ranging polling with quite a consistent message that Americans want Congress to act to strengthen nonprofit organizations. So, that polling centered around the charitable deduction, 85% of Americans wanting to see the charitable deduction restored permanently for every American, more than 3/4 of voters wanting to see it expanded. Again, that's information we look to deploy in our advocacy as part of a year-end package. also support for the seat at the table initiative. So 84% of Americans saying that they think government could solve problems better if nonprofits had an official seat at the table in government. And individual pieces of that legislation, of course, we all know the Nonprofit Sector Strength and Partnership Act would also provide nonprofit organizations with access to the same regular quarterly workforce data that corporations already get for free. And Americans supported that provision by 71% to just 9% opposition. So we're encouraged about this information. We have infographics that will be going up on that polling landing page shortly. So we hope folks will use it and reach out to us if they have any questions about it. On that front, the charitable deduction legislation, which we mentioned, which Jessica brought up earlier, has added some new co-sponsors since we last spoke at this group. Senator Warnock of Georgia has added his name to the Senate bill, and Congressman Bill Keating of Massachusetts has added his name to the House bill. So glad to see some momentum there. Speaking of the seat at the table legislation, that individual piece of it I mentioned on workforce data continues to show some momentum on its own. So again, since we last met in July, the appropriations committees have released their report language on, sort of some of the behind the scenes or slightly under the radar things that they're directing federal agencies to do in their annual funding bills. And both the House and the Senate subcommittees who write the Bureau of Labor Statistics budget have included language in their reports encouraging BLS and the administration to closely examine this issue. So again, we take that as a good sign. And it's one of many, many reasons why we're closely watching that end of year appropriations process. I did also want to mention that yesterday, the White House held its conference on hunger, nutrition, and health. It's the first conference of its kind in more than 50 years. The goal of this conference is nothing short of ending hunger and reducing diet-related disease by 2030, focusing on closing disparities amongst the groups that are impacted most. Independent sector largely has to stick to kind of sector spanning issues. But I will note that the administration unveiled $8 billion in new commitments made by corporations, by nonprofits, and by government partners. Just perusing that list, and you can drop it in the chat, it included commitments from the American Heart Association, thank you, Emily, from the YMCA, from Unidos US, from the American Association of Medical Colleges, the Rockefeller Foundation, and many other IS members. So thank you all for diving in on that work. It's so important. The last thing that I wanted to mention with you all is an issue that is sometimes outside of our historical, kind of work on tax policy, data privacy legislation. So in the waning days of July, the House Committee on Energy and Commerce voted to pass legislation on data privacy, the American Data Privacy and Protection Act. And it passed on an extremely bipartisan vote of 53-2. So that's always a good sign for momentum. This is legislation that would establish a national standard to protect consumer privacy, and it imposes obligations on covered entities, and it very explicitly includes nonprofit organizations of varying sizes in varying ways as covered entities. This bill could have significant impacts on nonprofits, and it's still a piece of legislation we're seeking to understand and to influence. We don't expect it to pass Congress anytime in the very near future, but this is our community's opportunity to dig in on it. So again, we're happy to share those resources as well. Somewhat detailed summary of that legislation. So after those updates, thank you, Manuel, for putting that info in the chat. Any questions about the Hill landscape or about the Legacy IRA Act, questions about the White House conference yesterday. I hope folks caught some of it on Twitter. Questions about data privacy or polling or anything else people want to raise for this group today? I see Denise Harlow's noting the chat may be disabled. So I do hope folks we'll put stuff in the Q&A if they would like. Give people one more second. Hop over there. You know where to find us. We're so grateful to you for joining us on this beautiful Thursday afternoon in Washington, D.C. Thank you to Emily. Thank you to Wes and Jessica. Thank you, Manuel, and the IS team. And thank you to all of you for the work you're doing day in and day out. We know that Congress might be leaving town for the next few weeks. We know that our work in the policy space, and more so our work out in the real world does not take a break. So we look forward to working with you, and keep at it. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks all. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Wes.